Okay, hi everyone. The purpose of today's mini lesson is going to be to look at the importance of elaboration and brevity when you're writing. To sort of express these two issues, they're two sides of a coin, um, I'm going to review this sentence with you together. So, this sentence is part of a little intro paragraph, a little intro essay that one student wrote in preparation for a class. And she wrote this sentence: the two most important problems that I am facing are knowing insufficient vocabulary and lack of confidence. Aside from grammatical issues here, which I can't really focus on right now, can't really explain, but there are two issues that I see here. The first, and they're both writing style issues, so they're not grammatical issues, but it's important to try to improve your writing style. So the first issue is brevity, and brevity means basically one principle when you're writing in English or in any language, I imagine. If you and there's a principle of brevity, which is the principle, and I've just named it myself here. It's the principle that if you must express yourself, clearly, or to express yourself clearly, you must do so in as few words as possible without losing your meaning. Let's take an example. The man with the car on the road drove off. You could say that, or you could just say Paul drove off. At the end of the day, if we know that Paul is the man with the car on the road, why not just use Paul? That's the principle of brevity that I'm trying to put forward here. To express yourself clearly, you must do so in as few words as possible without losing your meaning. That in itself is not a good expression here. That's not a brief. My definition of brevity doesn't comply with the principle of brevity that I'm trying to teach about. But let's move on. The second principle is elaboration. And the principle of elaboration is this: don't leave your reader confused and mired in ambiguity. So, for example, I went to the store and bought some things. You could write that, but why not write, I went to the store and bought groceries for next week. Obviously, groceries for next week is longer, making the sentence longer, but your reader perhaps wants to know, which store did you go to? So let's just add this. I went to the grocery store and bought meat and vegetables for next week. Sure? Or groceries for next week? Sure. Let's combine the principle of elaboration with the principle of brevity. I went to the grocery store and bought groceries for next week. And now your reader knows which type of store and which type of things you bought. So, making your sentence shorter without losing your meaning is good writing style, but also making your sentence longer in order to insert meaning, which should be there for your reader, is also good writing style. That's why these are two sides of the same coin. You have to write your sentences so that they're as brief as possible, but also as elaborate as possible. Your first sentence, just like I wrote here, isn't going to be ideal, but I can revise this definition and say brevity is expressing yourself, or the principle of expressing yourself clearly without losing meaning. Okay? That's the best that I can do at the moment. So let's take a look at the sentence that we have here. And let's take a look at the notes that I've written. The two most important problems that I am facing are knowing insufficient vocabulary and lack of confidence. Now, for context, the start of this paragraph goes, my 2020 resolution is improving my English skills. I moved to Canada 4 years ago with my spouse, and since then I had a hard time communicating with people in English, especially at work and at school, in school. The two most important problems that I'm facing are knowing insufficient vocabulary and lack of confidence. So, let's apply the principle of brevity. So what have I written here? I replaced the two most important problems that I'm facing with my primary issues are. Okay, so I've started the sentence differently. I've started the sentence with, so we'll call this the original sentence, and we'll call this the revised sentence. Let's get rid of all of these little things. So, in the revised sentence, my primary issues are. So, instead of my two most important problems, you don't need to identify two, because you're going to identify two later on in your sentence. It's enough to say, the primary issues that I am facing. And here's another note. So, the two most important problems that I am facing is the phrase that I have now reduced to my primary issues are. So, I've used primary instead of most important. One word instead of two. That's the principle of brevity, because these mean exactly the same thing. Problems, I've used issues. We can say issues. My primary problems are. It doesn't matter. You don't have to change this word. Now, that I am facing are, I've just said are. Why? You have to ask yourself, that I am facing. It's implied that the person is facing these problems when they just say my primary problems are. You don't need to write something that's basically implied anyways. So, the principle of brevity here would state that are is basically the same as that I am facing are. It's simply, these extra words are simply not needed. So, my primary problems are, and the other word that I've omitted is two. So, two, you don't need to say, because you say the two most important problems are A and B, right? But you don't have to, it's repetitive. Like, if you don't say two, the reader doesn't lose the meaning. So if I just type out, my primary problems are knowing insufficient vocabulary and lack of confidence, they don't lose anything or gain anything if you add, my two primary problems are. So part of brevity is reducing redundancy. Reduce redundancy. Don't use words that you don't need. Okay? So, the I've changed to my, just for clarity's sake, because if you say the primary problems are, it's unclear whose problems you're talking about, so I've used my. My primary problems are. Now, our original phrase here is knowing insufficient vocabulary and lack of confidence. The first part I'd like to focus on is knowing insufficient vocabulary. Now, in my notes, I said, I've replaced our knowing sufficient vocabulary and a lack of confidence with our vocabulary deficits. Okay, my primary problems are vocabulary deficits. And, okay, so instead of knowing insufficient vocabulary, I've just said vocabulary deficits. Again, principle of brevity. In 3 words here, versus in 2 words here. If this means basically the same thing as this, 2 words will beat 3. So my primary problems are vocabulary deficits and. Now, here's where the principle of brevity no longer applies, and we look at the principle of elaboration. So my primary problems are vocabulary deficits and I have said and feeling insecure when communicating with others. So I wrote, and feeling insecure when communicating with others. Okay, so let's make this Arial 12. There. So instead of and lack of confidence, I wrote, and feeling insecure when communicating with others. My sentence is much less brief than the student's. However, lack of confidence is unclear. Are you lacking confidence in your writing, in your speech, in your comprehension? Where's the lack of confidence evident? So, because of this lack of detail, I have replaced it with and feeling insecure when communicating with others, which arguably is also a pretty vague sentence ender. So let's come up with something that would fit better here. My primary problems are vocabulary deficits and perhaps a lack of confidence when speaking, instead of lack of confidence, and insecurity when speaking with others, and insecurity about how I sound when speaking with others. Okay? So you express what the insecurity is about, what the lack of confidence basically just means insecurity. You're insecure, but about what? About how I sound when speaking with others. So this is where the principle of elaboration helps you complete a sentence in a way that the principle of elaboration here helps you complete a sentence in a way that's going to be good for your reader who's looking your work over. So that's the mini lesson. Tune in for others in the near future, I hope. Happy learning.